This is Entertainment for Review, and as October continues to march along, so is this Friday the 13th review series, and today I'm going to be continuing with Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. This movie was released in 1988, making 1987 only the second year in the 80s that didn't have a Friday the 13th film. This film is also very notable to me because it's the first Friday the 13th film to feature Kane Hodder as Jason, who is my personal favorite Jason in the franchise. As always, please be aware that this review will be containing spoilers, and now let's begin our review of Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. Now, this movie does start up with a recap of things that have happened up until now, and we do start off seeing Jason still submerged beneath Crystal Lake where he was left at the end of the last movie. We then rise up and see a cabin where we see a little girl standing out on a porch and the parents are inside fighting. The father strikes the mother and the daughter, scared, runs away and gets on a boat and starts drifting out into the lake. The father goes out and tries to get her to come back. Now she's very angry at him for hitting her mother and says she wishes he was dead, at which point the dock begins to shake and collapse, causing the father to fall into the lake and drown. Now this is because Tina has the ability of telekinesis, so we are introducing another supernatural element into the series. Jason is no longer the only person who has some unnatural abilities, being basically a walking, killing corpse with super strength. We introduce another character with powers of their own. We then do jump into the future, and Tina and her mother are heading back to Crystal Lake to the cabin where her father died so that they can meet up with Dr. Cruz, Tina's therapist, who claims he's there to try to help her overcome the tragedy of her father's death. When they arrive, they do see that there is a group of teenagers in the cabin next door. It does seem clear from the beginning that Dr. Cruz's interests are more than just helping Tina. He's also interested in her telekinetic abilities, as he tries to get her in their first session to try to move something across the table and control them. Tina seems to struggle, and it seems to take strong emotions to bring it out, and when she gets angry, she does move it. And when she gets angrier, it's a matchbook and it bursts into flames. Tina is upset after seeing a picture of her father and goes back down to the lake. She seems to sense something in the lake, although that's Jason. She remembers wishing her father dead and he died, so she tries to wish him back to life. And using her power, she does seem to revive Jason, or at least wake him up, and his chain is broken and he rises to the surface. Tina sees this and is scared and passes out. Jason leaves the lake and immediately begins stalking through the woods. He is looking a little bit different in this movie. Still rocking the hockey mask, of course, but his body is more rotted away a little bit, showing bits of skeleton through. His hands look very skeletal, and he's looking kind of waterlogged from his long soak in the lake. Tina goes in and tells her mother and Dr. Cruz about what she saw and the man coming out of the lake, and Dr. Cruz dismisses this as delusions from what happened to her father. We then go to Michael and Jane. Their car is broken down on the side of the road. They are heading to the cabin to meet up with the other teenagers, which consist of Russell, Sandra, Kate, Eddie, David, Robin, Maddie, Melissa, and Nick. They're heading there because Jane borrowed the cabin, which belongs to Russell's uncle, so that they could throw a birthday party for Michael. They decide to walk through the woods, and Michael goes off to go to the bathroom. Jason comes up behind Jane and kills her by pinning her up against a tree and stabbing her through the neck with a tent spike. When Michael comes up and sees this, he begins running, and Jason begins stalking him through the woods. Now, Kane Hodder introduces a very key feature to Jason, and that's that he slowly stalks his victims through the woods. As his victim is running away, Jason is walking behind him at a pretty slow and methodical pace. It may not make the most sense, but I like this feature. Jason throws the tent spike and stabs Michael through the back, and then comes up behind him and picks him up, stabbing him again. We then do see Nick inviting Tina to come over to the party with the other teens, which she does agree to. She goes over, and they are all hanging out, having a good time. Then we do see that Tina does seem to have some connection to Jason through her abilities, and that she sees a vision of him killing Michael.
Over me.
She then runs from the party and goes back to her house and sees the tent spike stabbed through the outside of her porch, although it looks like it's been cleaned off. She goes inside and tells her mother and Dr. Cruz, who believe this is just another delusion. Dr. Cruz goes outside to check, and the tent spike is gone, although there is still a hole through the wood, so they should see some validity. But this causes Tina to even doubt it. Later that night, we see two campers, Dan and Judy, out in the woods, and Judy tells Dan to go get some more firewood so that they don't run out in the night. He goes to do that, and she goes into the tent. While he's gathering wood, Jason sneaks up behind him and kills him by driving his hand through his back, out his chest, and then breaking his neck for good measure. He then takes the machete he was using, giving Jason his signature weapon, which seems to be the main point of this scene. He then goes back to the campsite with Judy, slashes her tent open, pulls her out in her sleeping bag, and slams her up against a tree, killing her. Next morning, Tina and Nick are talking by the lake, and Tina gives him a bit of her backstory, which doesn't seem to bother him. What they don't see is that Melissa is hiding behind a tree, overhearing their conversation. Later in the day, Tina goes over to the party looking for Nick, and they're all preparing for Michael's birthday party. Melissa takes the opportunity to mock Tina about having been in a mental hospital, and this makes Tina angry, and using her ability, either consciously or not consciously, she snaps Melissa's pearl necklace. Freaked out by this, she goes back and talks to her mother and Dr. Cruz, saying she wants to leave. She's seeing things and her abilities are doing more, and it's freaking her out. Dr. Cruz is frustrated and says they can't leave because they're making progress, and if they did leave, she would just end up having to go back to the mental hospital. Everybody in the room is disagreeing, and Tina gets frustrated and levitates a TV and throws it at Dr. Cruz. She runs downstairs and is heading outside when she runs into Nick, who is trying to come over to apologize for Melissa. She says she wants to get out of there and then asks him if his cousin ever showed up. When he says he didn't, Jason. She asks if he has a picture of him, and he happens to have one in his wallet, which is a little weird. And Tina tells him that his cousin is dead. Next we see Russell and Sandra going out by the lake, and they decide to go for a swim. Sandra's already in the lake, and Russell's getting ready when Jason comes up and kills him with an axe blow to the face. Moments later, he pops up in the water beside Sandra and pulls her underwater, drowning her. This also again gives a little bit of validity to the Jason teleporting theory, as he appears to just appear in the lake moments later after having killed Russell and not having ever had time to have walked into the lake. Jason drags Sandra's body out of the lake, and we then see him stalking around the outside of the cabin as the teenagers are all having a party inside, continuing to wait for the birthday boy to show up. Nick is getting frustrated waiting for that and decides to go looking for him. We see Dr. Cruz in his office reviewing notes, and then we see that he has the tent spike that Sandra had seen in the drawer of his desk. Next, Tina's mother Amanda goes into Dr. Cruz's office and he's no longer there. She sits down and looks at his notes and seems concerned. We then do see Dr. Cruz walking through the woods, and he discovers the body of Michael stuck in a tree, and he discovers the tent spike on the ground covered in blood, though the one in the house was different. He seems freaked out and begins to run away. We then do go back to Amanda still looking through Dr. Cruz's stuff, and she finds the tent spike in his desk, as well as a videotape about his treatment. Dr. Cruz walks in the middle of this, and they begin to argue because she realizes that Dr. Cruz has been keeping Tina in a distressed state to try to amplify her power. Dr. Cruz then states that she doesn't understand the treatment, and he's going to have Tina committed. Tina overhears this from outside the door and takes the car and leaves. As she's driving away, she passes by the car that Michael was driving, and then she sees a vision of Jason in the road killing her mother, which causes her to crash the car. She then gets out and begins running back. Maddie goes outside and begins looking for David. She's wandering around, and then Russell's body falls out of a tree right in front of her. She screams, and this seems to draw Jason out from behind a tree he was standing by, and she runs and hides in a tool shed, and he follows her inside. She's trying to hide and goes behind a wall. When Jason's starting to come around, she goes underneath the wall and is standing there. He comes up behind her though and breaks one hand through the boards holding her in place, and the other hand holding a scythe kills her. We then do go back to Tina, who's running through the woods. She bumps into Nick, who's looking for Michael, and says she needs to go back and find her mother. Jason is back at the cabin of teenagers, where there are multiple groupings of teenagers doing what frisky teenagers do in these movies. And the first ones he decides to deal with are Ben and Kate, who are out in the van. Jason makes some noise, drawing them out. They think it's Michael finally arrived. When Ben goes outside, Jason gets up behind him and grabs him and crushes his head with his bare hands. When Kate sticks her head out the window to see what's going on, Jason grabs her and stabs her through the eye with a party horn. Jason then goes and kills the power to the cabin. Tina and Nick discover the body of Michael in the woods and continue running back. Jason enters the cabin and stands in the dining room. David comes downstairs looking for food and walks right by Jason lurking in the corner. While he's looking through the fridge, Jason sneaks up behind him, and when he turns around, stabs him in the stomach. Tina and Nick make it back to Tina's cabin, and they go up to Dr. Cruz's office, where Tina discovers that he had been hiding the tent spike. Then goes through a drawer looking for his gun. She finds some articles about Jason Voorhees, realizes that that's who was in the lake. And this also shows that Dr. Cruz knew about Jason. Tina grows more upset, and the room begins to shake with her powers. Back at the other cabin, we see Eddie in the living room opening Michael's gifts, and Melissa sneaks out the front door. Nick tells Tina he wants to gather everybody up and get them out of there, and Tina says she knows where her mother is. She's in the woods. And Nick says that they'll find her, but he wants to get everybody together so that they can all leave together. You then see Jason sneak up behind Eddie in the room he's in and kill him with a slash of the machete. Jason then moves upstairs, and we see Robin moving around upstairs trying to find somebody. She goes into a room looking for David and instead finds a cat hiding in a closet. When she sits down at a window, she sees a severed head beside her and screams. This draws Jason into the room. He grabs her and throws her out the window from the second floor. Back with Tina and Nick, Tina says she doesn't want to go anywhere without her mother, and Nick says he's going to go look for the others, and she's going to wait there. We then do see Jason back outside in the woods, and we see Dr. Cruz and Tina's mother running through the woods. Dr. Cruz seems nervous and says he's going to leave without her and she can find her own way back. That is until Jason appears behind both of them, and they take off running. When they stop, Dr. Cruz tries to say that Tina warned them about this, but Jason is caught up with them, and Dr. Cruz holds Amanda in place almost as a shield as Jason stabs and kills her. Nick then goes back in the other cabin looking for everybody, and he finds the dead body of Eddie, and he panics and runs back out and goes back to Tina's cabin, where he does not find Tina, but instead finds Melissa. Tina has gone out to the woods looking for her mother and instead finds Dr. Cruz hiding in the trees. He said she needs to come back with him, after at first lying, says that Tina's mother is gone, and this causes Tina to go running further into the woods. Dr. Cruz runs in the opposite direction and ends up running into Jason, who has a heavy-duty weed whacker. Jason does manage to chase down and kill Dr. Cruz with this. I do like in this movie, whenever it seems these people think they've gotten away, Jason just appears right behind them and moves kind of stealthily and just takes them out in quick order. He's both very direct and somehow using stealth. Tina then discovers the body of her mother and then continues running, and she sees Jason. She actually tries to follow him, and then ends up running through the normal gambit of dead bodies, and then continues running until they find each other face to face on a road. Tina uses her telekinetic abilities to ensnare Jason in roots, tripping him into a puddle, and then causes a power line to come down and try to electrocute him. This keeps Jason down for about a total of 30 seconds, and then he gets up and continues his pursuit. She goes into the cabin that the teens had been in, and Jason comes in making a dramatic entrance through the window. This is cool, but I like it better when he bursts through the door in a previous movie. They then continue to stand off as Tina tries to use her telekinesis to block Jason off. He continues to come forward and she bashes him with the couch. And finally, when he follows her outside, she collapses the porch on top of him, thinking she's killed him. And she rejoins Melissa and Nick in the other cabin. Of course, she hasn't killed him, and he begins making his way over. Melissa doesn't believe any of it and decides to leave. When she opens the door, Jason's standing right there and hits her over the head with an axe. Jason then comes after Nick and Tina, who manage to get around him and make it upstairs, but they're stuck in the hallway. As Jason's rising up the stairs, Tina uses her abilities to hit him in the face with a light fixture, causing him to fall backwards and fall through the stairs. As they're trying to make their way out, Jason bursts out of the bottom of the stairs and attacks Nick. Tina comes to his defense, first using her abilities to make Jason's mask tighten to the point that it breaks, revealing his face for the first time in this movie, and it's more grotesque than we've ever seen it before. No longer just looks like a disfigured man, he now looks like a full-on ghoul. She then makes a power cord come out from the ceiling and wrap Jason, hanging him up, and then she rips the floor open and drops him to the basement. As she's checking on Nick, Jason leaps up and pulls her down to the basement as well. She continues to use her telekinetic abilities to attack Jason with what's around, first with nails, and then she douses him with gas from a gas can, then causes fire to come out of the furnace and catch Jason on fire. Seems like he's down again as Nick gets Tina out and they run down to the dock, and for some reason the house explodes behind them. Not sure why this happened unless there was a gas source in there. They're at the dock thinking it's over when Jason materializes right next to them and throws Tina backwards. Nick attempts to shoot him a few times. I don't know what he thought a gun would do at this point, but he had to try something. Jason knocks him backwards into a boat, and then Tina begins to focus on the lake again. From her powers, and I guess perhaps the mojo of Camp Crystal Lake, her father leaps out of the lake, bursting through the dock, grabs Jason, and drags him back into the lake. And we end the movie with Tina and Nick being loaded into an ambulance and being driven away from the lake. Part 7 is definitely an interesting installment in the series and has its definite ups and downs. Start Jason off the same way, stuck beneath the lake, but we've decided to move on to a new group of people for the storyline. And this movie has another significant time jump. The movie does have some other strange things that cause continuity errors in my mind, such as the fact that they're back to calling it Crystal Lake in this movie instead of calling it Forest Green like it was in the previous. I don't see a town changing their name to forget this dark past only to change it back a few years later. Jason is still in this movie a full-on juggernaut who seems impervious to most damage. Still right in people's face in this movie, but he is a little more slow and meticulous in this movie as well. This is another movie where it's the hero of the movie's fault that Jason's back and killing people again. As we saw in Jason Lives when Tommy Jarvis brought Jason back by stabbing him with the pole that caused him to be struck by lightning. In this movie, Tina uses her telekinetic powers to wake Jason up beneath the lake. And some blame can be placed on Dr. Cruz, who seems to be the only one in the movie who knew about Jason ahead of time. In the other movies, there's always a story going around or a legend of Jason that at least a few people seem to be aware of. In this movie, it's just Dr. Cruz who had any foreknowledge of Jason, and without him, Tina wouldn't have known who it was. In this movie, Jason's back history seems to have no relevance. He's just starting a brand new killing spree in Crystal Lake. And what a killing spree it is. There are a total of 16 kills in this movie, 15 of which belong to Jason. First kill actually indirectly belongs to Tina, as she caused the dock to collapse, which caused her father to fall into the lake and drown. Jason's 15 kills include Jane and Michael, Dan and Judy, Russell, Sandra, Maddie, Ben, Kate, David, Eddie, Robin, Amanda, Dr. Cruz, and Melissa. So he wasted no time after his long nap. I do like that we gave Jason an opponent that was harder for him to deal with. Because of Tina's powers, he couldn't really get in close to her for a direct attack. I am not, however, a huge fan of the ending of this movie. I don't really like the choice to have Tina's father rise up out of the lake and pull Jason back in to end the fight. I guess this was intended to be the shock moment that we get in a lot of these movies. This one, for me, just didn't work. And for a movie that I overall think is pretty good, I think this just ended things on a bad note. As I've said before, there's always a continuity problem with these long-running horror series. After the first movie, Jason went on a 3-movie long killing spree. Some overlap, and we have 3 movies that feature Tommy Jarvis. For this one, we've moved on to something new with Tina, although Tina's story is done here. And going forward, it's just new characters, new movie, new plot, with the only common thread being Jason Voorhees. And as I've stated, I do enjoy Kane Hodder's rendition of Jason in this film. I like his slow, methodical walk, I like his stealth ability while still being very direct, and I don't think there's any denying the Jason teleporting theory because he just pops up wherever he needs to be. Critically, this movie is not as well received as its predecessor, but still better than some of the others in the series. This movie on Rotten Tomatoes gets a 35% score from critics and a 37% score from audiences. And over on IMDb, it gets a 5.2 out of 10 from audience scores. For me, I score this one at a 6.2 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts on Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, in the comment section below. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Keep an eye out for my next video that will be coming soon, which will be Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan.